Hi, I'm Dr. Paul. This is Live on Purpose TV. A thing from my past that you might not know, I did my doctoral dissertation on bedwetting. I'm going to share some tips with you today about how to help kids stop wetting the bed. Those of you who know me may be surprised that I'm doing a video about bedwetting. But I got to give you a little bit of the history of this. To become a doctor, to receive my PhD, I had to do what's called a doctoral dissertation. My dissertation, I've got it right here. My dissertation is basically everything you never wanted to know about bedwetting. Yeah, this is part of my history. And I used to work a lot with kids who wet the bed. And it came up that there was a missing piece of information out there in the literature. All of the parents that I talked to could have told you this. Kids who wet the bed sleep more deeply. They're harder to wake up than kids who don't. The parents could tell you that, but it was nowhere in the psychological or the pediatric or the urological literature. Wasn't anywhere. That had never been shown or demonstrated until Dr. Paul shows up and proves it with his doctoral research on bedwetting. That's basically what I did. You probably don't want to read this, but I'm going to share with you a few of the things that I learned about bedwetting so that we can get on top of this thing. My dissertation, by the way, was also published in the Journal of Children's Healthcare, which shows that it was a significant contribution to the field of knowledge in this area. We didn't know, scientifically proven, that kids slept more deeply who wet the bed. Now this leads into two of the things that I want to talk about here. There are two primary causes for bedwetting. Now, first of all, there's different kinds of enuresis or bedwetting. I'm talking about the kind where it's limited to nighttime bedwetting. That's called nocturnal enuresis, and primary enuresis, which means that there's never been a period of dryness for more than 6 months. Secondary enuresis, which is where they've been okay for a while and then they go back to wetting the bed, that tends to have some other components that we're not going to address in this video. So I'm talking about primary nocturnal enuresis, the kind that they've never had a period of dryness, and it happens just at night, not during the daytime too. Okay? So just to be clear about what we're talking about, primary nocturnal enuresis. There are two causes. One of those causes is what I just shared with you, what I found in my doctoral research, that they sleep more deeply than other kids who don't wet the bed. The other cause, and you have to have both of these, by the way, in order to have bedwetting occur, the other cause is a deficiency in a particular hormone. It's called antidiuretic hormone, ADH for short, which in a normal functioning person causes you to dry up at night. That's why you don't have to get up all night and go to the bathroom. Well, some people do. Usually older people, pregnant people, right? They've got some hormonal changes where that hormone isn't serving them, and so they have to get up and relieve themselves. Well, if you have sufficient of the hormone on board, even if you're sleeping deeply, it dries you up and you don't have an issue. If you don't have enough of the hormone, like in a pregnant woman, for example, who's got a lot of different hormonal changes going on, maybe that's interfering. Some people say, oh, I've got this baby pressing on my bladder. Really? The baby's this big. How much is it going to press? Anyway, it's a hormonal thing, but they don't sleep so deeply so that they can pick up those cues that are coming up through the nervous system that tell them, hey, get up and go take care of business. So you got to have both of those in order to have enuresis, okay, or bedwetting. Now that's important to know because how we're going to treat it is going to address those two factors. Now, one of the common treatments, and if you go to your pediatrician, for example, they may suggest some kind of a synthetic form of the hormone that causes them to dry up at night. Okay, so if your kid's wetting the bed, you can give them a dose of this hormone or the synthetic hormone. Usually it's in the form of a nasal spray, which causes them to dry up for that night. So it's a symptom treatment. It doesn't address the cause. And most kids will grow out of this by the time that they're 18. You're thinking 18, really? Do I have to wait that long? Yeah, but only a small percentage of bedwetters are still wetting the bed at 18. I think it's 2 or 3%. So it's not very high. Sometime between the age that your kid is right now and 18, they're probably going to clear up on their own. And that's because their brain and their body start to adjust and create the hormones that they need to take care of the problem. Well, what are we going to do in the meantime? The best interventions that we're finding, and what I found in my own research of this topic, are behavioral approaches that train kids to wake up and go to the bathroom. You know what? I don't even care if they wake up. Quite frankly, they can do it in their sleep if they want, as long as they do it appropriately. I'm good with that, right? So we want to train them to respond to the signals that are already coming up from their bladder and from their body. We want their brain to start handling that differently than it has been. See, up until now, the brain just stays asleep and it's like, oh, don't bother me. The signals are coming through, but they're not triggering anything. So what we've done is designed a behavioral program that conditions and trains the brain to respond differently to those signals. And it's more than we can cover in this particular video, but I've created an ebook that addresses that. And you can get that in the links in the description of the video. What it does is it takes you through a behavioral training program. Now, let's put a little context around this, because think about it. There are things that you easily wake up to, and there are things that you sleep right on through. When Vicki and I were first married, we moved into a little basement apartment. This place was so small, seriously, I could touch my nose to the ceiling in the bedroom. And I know that's not even up to code, but this particular basement apartment was dug out by hand by our landlord, who wanted to be able to move some students in there. Well, that's where we lived. And in this apartment, we were about, 2 blocks from a major railroad. And those trains would come rumbling through and they would shake the whole place. And sometimes they'd sound their horns and it's just loud. And so when we first moved in, I'm like, wow, we got a lot of train traffic here. And my wife's like, yeah, I know, I could hardly sleep. Well, after a few months, we got used to it. I wasn't waking up to it anymore. I didn't even know that they were still coming through. When we had our first baby, we would wake up to the slightest little sniffle from the crib, because our mind is attuned to what's important and what's not. I commented to my wife, I said, wow, it's interesting that they don't have the trains running at night anymore. And she's like, oh yeah, they do. She was getting up to nurse the baby and she could still hear the trains because she's awake. I'm sleeping right through it. So our mind has the ability to attune to certain things and to ignore other things. It's like the feeling of your shoes. Oh, you can feel them now, and that's because I called your attention to it, right? Told your brain it's important, pay attention to that. That's basically what we're doing with a behavioral approach to bedwetting. We're saying, hey, pay attention to that signal that's coming up from your bladder. And quite frankly, even if they don't wake up, as long as we can get them to respond to that in an appropriate way, then we're going to solve the problem. Okay? And eventually they're going to grow out of the hormonal part of what's causing the bedwetting. So there is hope. There is hope, you guys. And it works quite well. But it's a lot of work to program and train the brain to respond differently. And that's why it's good to have something to help you walk through it. That's why I've designed the program, so you can get that in the description. Short version, there's hope, okay? Understand that this is something that happens pretty regularly. Oh, and by the way, I wanted to make that point too, because how you approach this matters. A lot of kids are so embarrassed by this problem. They don't want to tell their friends about it, and they're not eager to talk about it with you either. So taking this on is kind of a challenge. It's kind of hard. It's so important to stay positive, to use a very positive, affirming approach. And I also want to empower your child to be in charge of this. Okay? And we're going to do this with smiles and a good attitude. If we don't have those on board, it's just going to be hard and difficult. And that's the part that you're going to expect from me because I'm the positivity guy, right? But positivity is important in treating bedwetting as well because of the difficulty that's entailed. But as we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. And this can become a challenge and a task that you can take on together with your child. It could actually help to build your relationship instead of tearing it down the way that sometimes it will. So have fun with this, keep a positive perspective, and know that there's some hope. So let me give you a little example of what I mean by behavioral training. Basically, we're going to condition and train the brain to respond differently to the signals that are coming. One of the mistakes that a lot of people make if their kid is wetting the bed is they start to restrict fluids in the evening hours. In my behavioral training program that we talk about in the ebook, I actually encourage plenty of fluids. Why? Because we want that signal from the bladder to be very clear. You see what I'm saying? We don't want to reduce that at all because we're going to train the brain to respond to it differently. To notice, like my baby crying, that, oh, this is important, pay attention to that, instead of tuning it out like we did with the trains. Okay? So we're not going to restrict fluids, we're actually going to encourage fluids. Okay? And then an example of the behavioral process. We might go in during the nighttime, for example, and wake up the child. Not even wake him up, but get him enough aware to answer a question. Do you need to go to the bathroom? And then there's a yes or a no to that. Okay? If there's a no, it's like, awesome, I'll be back in an hour. Okay, you can tell this is pretty intensive for parents. Then you check again in an hour. Do you need to go to the bathroom? Yes. Okay, then get up and go to the bathroom. So we're going to do some behavioral training that's connected to the feelings. But here's where it gets really powerful. Usually we'll encourage the use of an alarm system. The one that I typically use has an alarm that's built into the underwear that the child is wearing. It's connected to a 100 decibel alarm. Okay, 100 decibels is like a fire alarm. This is loud. It will not wake them up. That's what my doctoral dissertation proved. They sleep right through it. A lot of the kids in my study group slept right through a 100 decibel alarm. I know, but it will wake up the parents. Okay, this alarm is set off by moisture. So this alarm is going off because they just had a bedwetting incident. Okay? Now, some people will think, oh, but we were trying to avoid it. No, we're not. We're not trying to avoid that. We're trying to reprogram that. Okay? So it's a good thing that this is happening. And it's okay that it only woke up mom and dad down the hall or upstairs. Mom and dad respond. They're the ones that get the kid to now get up and perform a series of tasks. And this is all outlined in the book, but it's a series of tasks called nighttime cleanliness training. Our goal is not to avoid bedwetting incidents. Our goal is to stay clean and dry. And this is how we emphasize it with the kids. Clean and dry. That's what we're going for, right? When the alarm goes off, it suggests that we are neither of those things right now. So we're going to go through a series of tasks in the middle of the night that get us back to clean and dry. The child has primary responsibility for that. Here's what happens. That's not fun. Okay? The child wants to do what? They want to keep sleeping. They're out cold, right? They have to get up in the middle of the night and go through this whole routine to get back to clean and dry, and that includes changing the sheets. It's kind of intensive. That's the whole point. Because the brain will do more to avoid pain than it will to seek pleasure. And in this training program, behaviorally, we're training the brain to respond to, oh my gosh, I don't want to get up and go through all of those tasks. I wonder if there's any signals coming in that would warn me that that's going to happen. We're training their brain to respond differently to the signal coming from their full bladder. See? This is how we get the brain to get that kid up instead of mom and dad having to do it. It takes a little training process, but that's an example of where we're going to go with the behavioral part. And again, you can get the full program in the ebook Finally Dry. So that's in the description on the post. So hopefully you got some good ideas about this bedwetting thing. I mentioned in the video today that there's an ebook available. It's called Finally Dry. You can get that at my website. The link is in the description below. Share some questions too. Open a discussion. I'm happy to respond. This is Live on Purpose TV.